Video number 7, the temporal cycle of the liturgical year. The temporal cycle unfolds the whole mystery of Christ all throughout the year. That's the idea. So we're focusing now on the cycle that is weekly and that is yearly. And let's start first with the weekly cycle. What can we say about Sunday? Well, the church calls it the original feast day. One thing that we have universal attestation to in the early church is the observance of Sunday as a primary day for liturgy and for Christians meeting and celebrating. Okay, so I just want to point out there's a number of people who are really angry with us for this, and us as Catholics and everybody else who celebrates Sunday. There are Jehovah's Witnesses and there are Seventh-day Adventists who say that we should be observing the Sabbath. After all, the 10 Commandments say, keep holy the Sabbath. And look what the church did. Sometime around the time of Constantine, we changed all this and we made it the Sunday. And so this is a pagan thing and it's disobeying God's word. Well, historically, that's nonsense. Okay. Now, honestly, I actually quoted a sectarian pamphlet right in our article in the course notes. So this is a quote, a direct quote that basically the charge is that Constantine around 321 AD made Sunday the day of worship instead of the Sabbath. And there could be nothing further from the truth. The New Testament writers weren't that interested in describing the worship life of the church. But there are echoes of the Lord's Day, Sunday, the first day of the week, being a major day of Eucharist and of Christians gathering. You see it in the Gospels. For example, we already talked about Emmaus event that happened on Easter Sunday afternoon. The disciples are gathered on Easter Sunday afternoon when Thomas is missing and Jesus first shows up. And then the following week, it's a Sunday. So we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday, and we always have the gospel about Thomas because it happened on the Sunday after Easter. So that's pretty important. But we also get other echoes, and I've already mentioned them, but I'll review them here since we're talking about this topic right here. All right. So how about Acts 27? It's on the first day of the week when we were gathered together to break bread that Paul preaches too long and Didache falls out of the window. All right, but it's the first day of the week when we were gathered to break bread. Break bread is a code name in the early church for the Eucharist. It was the first term that was used for what we now call the Eucharist or the Mass. Okay, we also find in 1 Corinthians 16:2, Paul says, on the first day of each week, that's when I ask you to put something aside and store it up for the poor in Jerusalem. Well, that's because they met on the first day of each week. That's why the collection could be taken up and why it should be taken up. It's a special Christian day. We see that Revelation 1:10, John experiences his revelation on what he calls the Lord's Day. So the day of the Lord, the day that he rose from the dead, becomes the Christian day for meeting. Now, a lot of Christians, early Christians, were Jews who went to synagogue for Sabbath, but also were Gentiles who were God-fearers. They believed in the God of Israel, although they did not keep the entire law. Take a look at the centurion who built the synagogue of Nazareth, whose servant was healed by Jesus. He's most likely a God-fearer. That's the name of Gentiles who honored the God of Israel, even though they weren't circumcised and didn't follow all prescriptions of the law. Jews welcomed these people in their synagogues. The first Christian converts most likely were God-fearers. Okay, and if you look carefully in the New Testament, you'll see that. But they very well may have gone to synagogue for quite a while on Sabbath, but they met together distinctively as Christians on the Lord's Day. And we see actually very clearly in St. Ignatius of Antioch. Now he's writing after the New Testament period, around 110 AD, but he clearly says the apostles taught us not to celebrate the Sabbath so much, but the Lord's Day. So this is something that's universal. It's tradition with a capital T. It's ubique, it's semper, it's ab omnibus, that the apostles taught us to keep the Lord's Day holy in a very special way. Now, I will tell you that Christians for a long time honored the seventh day. And even to this day in the Roman liturgy of the hours, we often pray in morning prayer, Psalm 92, which is the Sabbath prayer. It's a Sabbath psalm. So like we have survivals of honoring the Sabbath. In the early church, there wasn't any fasting on Saturday in most places. Rome did, but not in most places in like Milan or in the East. As a matter of fact, this is the advice of good old St. Ambrose. St. Ambrose is the one who said, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Because someone said to him, hey, we don't fast up here on Saturdays, but they fast down in Rome. I'm going to Rome. What should I do? Basically, follow the liturgical customs in your own place. That's where the saying comes from. And it came from liturgical diversity, even in the 4th century. Okay, but the Sabbath on Saturday is kind of still, it has a remembrance in the Christian year, but we don't follow Sabbath law, and we honor the Lord's Day on Sunday. The early church, for the first 300 years, had Sunday as a normal work day. Constantine did make it a holiday, but that's all he did. Prior to that time, Christians would gather for worship early in the morning in the 2nd century and the 3rd century, and then they'd go to work for the rest of the day and sometimes gather in the evening for a meal. They could have had the meal the night before, especially if they still had serious Jewish influence on them, because the day starts in the evening before, according to Jewish ideas. Okay, but anyway, I just want to get back to the meaning of the Lord's Day. Why do we celebrate Sunday? Well, it's the day that Lord created light, the first day of creation, and Jesus is the light of the world. He is the dawn on high who breaks upon us. So he is the Son of Righteousness with healing in his wings. So it's very clear, this imagery of Jesus as the light makes Sunday special, but even more importantly, he rose on Sunday. It's the 8th day. This is the first, in the 2nd century, we have the Epistle of Barnabas, which was not written by Barnabas the Apostle, but it bears his name, and it comes from the 2nd century. But there we have Sunday called the 8th day. And in Christian architecture, especially early architecture, Byzantine architecture, a lot of the early churches were built octagonally. And you'll go to Jerusalem today and you'll see octagonal churches, like the Chapel of the Ascension is octagonal. Why? Because it's a number, a symbol of the resurrection, the 8th day. So the day symbolizes light. The day symbolizes the resurrection, and that's why we celebrate the Eucharist in a special way on Sunday. The Eucharist, by the way, always has a resurrectional dimension to it. And so, yes, it makes present the sacrifice of the cross, but it also makes present the power of the resurrection, and it's a celebration of both events, Jesus' death for us and the glorious resurrection that saves us from death. So anyway, the Lord's Day, it's universal. You find it everywhere. And, I mentioned already the Syrian liturgy and the Maronite liturgy, which is an example of the Syrian family. It specifically greets Sunday. Every Sunday Mass, there's a special prayer that greets the day as the day of resurrection. Blessed is Sunday, for on it began creation, the world's salvation, the renewal of the human race. On Sunday, heaven and earth rejoiced, and the whole universe was filled with light. So, actually, the church has repeatedly called this a Recover Sunday. In fact, John Paul wrote a beautiful letter, Dies Domini, 1998, where he pleads with us to recover the beauty and the meaning of Sunday. So Leo XIII, back in the 19th century, Pius X, Pius XII, Vatican II, John Paul II, they all try to get us to restore Sunday to its original rank. So like saints' days aren't celebrated on Sunday unless they're a solemnity. Or a major feast of Mary. So everything else, every other saint's day is eclipsed by Sunday, because Sunday is a solemnity in and of itself. So this is part of trying to recover the importance and the centrality of the Paschal mystery. Okay, so we need to try to resist assimilation of Sunday to the weekend. which is kind of an American thing. Just another day to shop and get personal things done and to relax. I mean, it is a good time to relax, but let's try our best to avoid doing unnecessary tasks and especially servile, unpleasant labor. For someone who worked full-time as a gardener, probably gardening on Sunday would not be appropriate. But for me, who sits at a desk a lot and stands before cameras like this, I love the garden. So for me, gardening on Sunday is restorative. It's an experience of God, being out there with my fingers in the dirt and sniffing the scents of the garden and watching the dragonflies buzz by. So, you should do something that refreshes you and refreshes your family. Having a meal together as a family, we need to restore that, generally speaking, but especially on Sunday and on solemnities. I try to do the Liturgy of the Hours. And sometimes I miss Vespers because it's tough to get work finished, and then there's dinner, and then there's cleanup, and sometimes I don't get Vespers in. But on Sunday, I really try because it's so rich, it's so wonderful. And I try to get first Vespers in on Saturday evening for sure, because it's so wonderfully rich. So to have a little bit more time for reflection, Sunday is meant to be, according to John Paul II, a contemplative day. We have a to-do list that's endless, right? Everyone does. So Monday through Saturday, we're racing to get that to-do list done. I would just encourage you on Sunday to just put aside the to-do list and look at what's been done. Look at what's been done by Christ for you, what you've accomplished through his power. Give thanks for it, savor it, contemplate it, and just leave aside the frantic need to get tons more things done. Now, there's always the beautiful thing. I'm very grateful as a Catholic that there's no law that obliges us to walk only a certain distance on Sunday, or not to turn off lights, or not to, not to cook. These are part of the Jewish law. We don't have that kind of law that restrict us and tell us exactly how to celebrate this day. But the call to try to recapture its meaning is there. And I would just say, looking around, I don't see a lot of evidence that we've been terribly successful. So let's work on that. Let's work on trying to restore that. Likewise, Friday. In the early church, it was expected that you would fast and do penance. Jews fasted and did penance. Remember what the Pharisee says in Luke chapter, it's chapter 18, the publican and the Pharisee. The Pharisee prides himself, talks to God, and tries to explain how important he is and how lucky God is to have him. And he says, I fast twice a week. And we find out in the Didache that fast at that time, the late 1st century, early 2nd century, that pious Jews fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. And by the time of the Didache, most Christians were distinguishing themselves from the synagogue. In fact, they had been thrown out of the synagogue. In the 80s or 90s, there was a prescription added to daily prayer that kind of cursed heretics, including Christians. So it made it hard for Christians to continue going to synagogue in the 80s and the 90s. So we see a separation happening. And so what is said by the Didache author is, don't fast like the hypocrites on Monday and Thursday, fast on Wednesday and Friday. So this goes back to late 1st century, early 2nd century, the idea of Wednesdays and Fridays as penitential days. And both of these days have been maintained in the East. So in the Eastern churches, you'll have Wednesdays and Fridays, no Eucharist. Remember, the Eucharist is festive. It always expresses the resurrection. And so if it's a penitential day, you can have communion, but it has to be a communion service, the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts. So we do that in the Western Church on Good Friday only. And there's no liturgy at all on Saturday because, again, the Eucharist has this festive dimension to it. So in the West, we've lost Wednesday as a penitential day. It's kind of dropped out, but we still have Friday as a penitential day. Believe it or not, in the Roman, in the prescriptions for all of us, there is abstinence on, this is the canon law now. I'm just going to read canon law 1249, Code of Canon Law. All members of the Christian faithful in their own way are bound to do penance in virtue of divine law. In order that all may be joined in a common observance of penance, penitential days are prescribed. I just want to point out that everyone can fast anytime they want, really, right? So you can do an individual private fast. But in the Old Testament, there were public fasts that were called. Some were liturgical and happened every year, like Yom Kippur, they still do. But some were occasioned by specific need. So it says in Joel, for example, Joel chapter 2, 15, blow the trumpet in Zion, proclaim a fast, call the assembly. So the leaders of God's people have a right to, from time to time, proclaim fasts so that we can beseech God together in intercession and in penance. So that's why in the Roman Church and in all the churches going back to the time of the apostles, the church authority prescribes certain fast regulations for certain seasons and days. Okay, so Friday in the Roman Church normally is abstinence throughout the year from meat, except when it's a solemnity. A solemnity trumps everything. Okay, so it's a festive day, even if it falls on a Friday, even if it falls in Lent, it's a festive day. So we don't allow any solemnities in Holy Week. We will move them. We won't dispense with them. So if the Annunciation falls during Holy Week, it'll get moved till after Easter. All right. But if it falls on Friday, then no fasting on Friday, no abstinence on Friday. Now, the right is given for local bishops to make decisions to substitute other things other than abstinence from meat. So I love fish. I would prefer fish than to meat most of the time. So given a choice going out to a restaurant, I often order a fish dish and go to a fish restaurant. So for me, fish on Friday is no sacrifice at all. So the church gives, going out, fish is actually even more expensive. It used to be cheaper than meat. Meat used to be really expensive. So you only had meat in earlier days in our society. You only had meat on special days. And that's why there's abstinence from meat on Friday. All right. Now, I love lobster. It costs twice as much as meat. So it wouldn't be a sacrifice for me to have lobster on Friday. So the church says substitute something meaningful if you rather not do abstaining from meat. All right. Now, the problem is when that was done in the 60s, it wasn't communicated very well to people, and it's not still today. So no one knows that you should either abstain from meat on Friday or substitute another penance that makes Friday count. It makes it a penitential day. That makes it a day in which you remember the Lord's suffering and sacrifice. Now, if you do the Liturgy of the Hours and it'll really help you because the hours reflect the penitential character of Friday. If you don't, you would miss it. Even Mass on Friday doesn't necessarily, the text of Mass doesn't let you know it's a penitential day, in the Roman Rite at least. So the point is, we got to find ways that we recapture the wonderful tradition of penitential days, particularly the weekly celebration of Friday. So that was video 6. In our next video, we'll be going through the temporal cycle.